Hello, everyone. Peter Maravellis here on behalf of City Lights booksellers and publishers. I'd like to welcome you to a special edition of City Lights Live. We're happy to have with us today Dr. Kile Ortigo. We'll be exploring the subject of his new book titled Beyond the Narrow Life, a guide for psychedelic integration and existential exploration, published by our friends over at Synergetic Press. Dr. Ortigo is a clinical psychologist and founder of the Center for Existential Exploration, which supports people exploring profound questions about identity, meaning, life transitions, and psychospiritual development. He also serves on the advisory boards of Psychedelic Support, an online training and clinician directory for legal psychedelic informed care, and Project New Day, a nonprofit organization providing harm reduction resources for people using psychedelics in their addiction recovery process. For several years, Dr. Ortigo worked at the National Center for PTSD, where he collaborated on technology development and implementation projects, ranging from apps like Mindfulness Coach to online programs like WebStare. With colleagues at NCPTSD NYU and Harvard University, Dr. Ortigo co-authored the second edition of Treating Survivors of Childhood Abuse and Interpersonal Trauma, STARE Narrative Therapy, which was released in June of 2020. Dr. Ortigo recently participated in a program that City Lights and Synergetic Press produced, honoring the life and work of Anne and Sasha Shulgin, the two great pioneers of consciousness exploration. So it is great to have him back in our virtual halls, this time celebrating the release of his own new book. Dr. Ortigo, it is a great pleasure and an honor to have you back with us. Thanks for taking the time from your busy schedule to join us, and welcome to City Lights Live.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. I had such a great time on the panel, so I'm happy to be back.
Well, I'd like to begin by congratulating you on your new book and on the great service it performs in helping us articulate a positive direction that therapeutic practice using psychedelics can move into. And I think with the Biden administration in office, with the popularization of concepts like microdosing in the public eye, I mean, it seems like we have a moment of opportunity to kind of open up new dialogues about consciousness exploration. And I'd like to know, I mean, what role do you hope your book plays in the modern psychedelic renaissance in the West?
Well, you know, there's a lot of excitement about psychedelics these days and their potential for healing, transformation, both individually and for our society and cultures and communities. And a big part of that is the realization of just how very powerful psychedelic experiences and other non-ordinary states of consciousness can be. But oftentimes what's given less attention in the media and in some conversations is the importance of the integration process. And what integration is just the meaning making from these powerful experiences and the translation of those potential insights and experiences into our daily lives. So that may mean, you know, what is the impact on our approach to relationships, our sense of deeper meaning, our sense of responsibility, in our connection to others, and including non-human life and to the entire cosmos. So there's a lot that can happen in these experiences, and then trying to bring that into our everyday life when we wake up, maybe have a cup of coffee, go to work, come back, you know, go to bed, etc., is a bit of a conundrum for a lot of people. So I wanted to write my book as a guide to really explore that process of confronting our consensus shared reality and trying to make sense of it in a very difficult time in our human history. Not that there have been very many easy times for our species, but to cast a wide net too. I wanted to appeal to readers coming from a lot of different kind of cultural, religious, and political points of view, which is very hard to do in this time of polarization. But to center one's own explorations of meaning and own explorations of just where we are in this day and age, what it means to be human. And so I wanted it to be a dialogue. Even though I wrote the book, I always had the reader in mind as someone who's co-creating the experience, the journey for me. So to cast that big net, I used Joseph Campbell's monomyth, The Hero's Journey, the idea that there's this shared meta-narrative across all of the world's mythologies, folktales, and religions that has some deep meaning about the human experience. So I hope this book as a guide is both a resource for integration, but also can stand alone, because I kept it close to the consensus reality and brought in, integrated a lot of different fields and parts of psychology. My training as a psychologist, there are interdisciplinary elements to it. The most fun for me is film work, because I come from a film studies background too. And that's a way to really communicate to a wide variety of people.
Yeah. So what tips do you have for readers on how to approach the book? Because I think really the book is a kind of a technology. Is this a book that serves best when people work together with it, say in study groups or in maybe even larger public forums? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I do think there are multiple ways to use the book. My previous book was a treatment manual for therapists working with clients. So this book is informed by that, but I wanted it not just to be for therapists. But that sort of mentality was helpful too, because I think it plays a role for therapists, for coaches, as well as just individual explorers. I use we language. I make it very conversational. I fundamentally believe there's more that connects us than divides us, and that we're all human in the end. So that was my approach in writing it. But I think it's possible for someone individually to do the journey by themselves and get a lot out of it. And I think if you have like a friend or a peer or a partner who's willing to go on the journey too, that the book offers, then I think, by gosh, that's going to really deepen the intimacy and connection with that person, whoever that is. Could be a stranger. So I think they're really probably the most common use of the book for the time being will be peer-to-peer support and deepening personal growth. Maybe after people have a psychedelic experience, whether at one of these legal retreats or elsewhere. I think this is part of that process of integration. But through working with other people, no matter what their role is, I mean, this is part of community building too. So I think that is good for motivation, good for, keeping up the journey. And, the hero's journey was never an individual journey. It always involves others. So I think that's a fun parallel too.
Yeah. And I would like to talk a little bit about Joseph Campbell. And since you bring up the mythic dimension, I mean, we're moving past the cliches of the 60s and 70s insofar as psychedelics are concerned. And, I'm just wondering what kind of new myths, I think as practitioners, should we be thinking about in terms of what we need to generate, to bring people together? Because, I think, we've always known that at large, we could really, kind of use psychedelics as a really powerful tool to bring forth social change and, kind of broaden people's perspectives on reality. What are your thoughts about the mythic dimension?
Yeah, one of the things that Joseph Campbell and others have emphasized is that real myth is always alive. If it's just an old ancient story that has no meaning and is boring, it has no connection to our daily lives or modern life, then it's not really the myth with the capital M myth. And I think keeping that in mind is really important as we think about our current situation with the world, from the ecological crisis to all the polarization and isms, racism, sexism, etc. Like we go on, not to get everyone down, but recognizing that these are the problems that we're facing, some of it involving technology. Some of these overlap with the problems we've always faced as humans, in group, out group thinking, but some of it's new. And that's why myth, I think now often is being portrayed through like science fiction, the incorporation of technology, good, bad, and ugly, and like how to navigate this, changes in our societies, our world. Like that's what our myth needs to be about, because we're facing these changes. I think what is particularly distinct now, though, is the need to have very wide-ranging mythologies that involve multiple characters. There's not just one hero. There never was just one hero, but how can we think about multiple heroes working together? Something like the Avengers is a good example of that. And, we can have this as just entertainment, but there are also some important messages about working together and respecting diversity, because there are so many different people, types of people, identities. Certainly that is incredibly important, especially as we zoom out and see how small we are in the cosmos. We could just think about the solar system and we're incredibly small, but when thinking larger and larger, it really puts in bold relief how we need to work together. And if we don't find ways to do that, then, things are just going to get harder for us.
Yeah. Speaking of which, for those interested in activism and helping foster positive attitudes towards psychedelic exploration, I mean, what would you suggest as being kind of a useful way to contribute? I mean, and thinking about the spectrum of individuals, I mean, from medical professionals to all the way to students, I mean, what would you suggest?
Yeah, I think students are in a great, exciting time of their life, no matter what age they are being students. I consider myself a lifelong learner, and I think that is a good attitude to have when going into any profession, but probably in psychology in particular, or working with or without psychedelics, because there's just such a wide range of experiences people can have. It can be very powerful, sometimes scary and challenging, sometimes very transformative, and it takes work, and there's a sense of humility that's important to do, in respect, to do this work. So I think that would apply to everyone, but students are in a good role for that. Educate yourself, choose a field, whether it's psychology, medicine, I mean, law, there are so many different fields that could be helpful. And as we think about mindfully and respectfully bringing these experiences into a modern culture, if things continue to go well with the research and decriminalization, et cetera. But don't get too narrow, because, I mean, Beyond the Narrow Life, the title of my book, if we get too narrow, then we get kind of sucked into what we may call it the reality tunnel. That's a helpful phrase. We may dismiss all the things that are outside of whatever frame that we have. And I think that's limiting, and that's not what the idea of expanding consciousness and awareness really is about. And so there's that. I think there are many, many roles to potentially play moving forward in society and in this movement or beyond. We don't know how things are going to go with psychedelics, but if you're interested in that, also have a backup plan because it's important to have wide-ranging skills. So there's some pragmatism there, but those skills are going to be helpful just because there are so many different potential uses and needs as this moves forward.
Yeah. Well, Beyond the Narrow Life is an exceptional book and wonderful resource, and the timing of its release couldn't be better. On behalf of City Lights, I'd like to thank you for being with us, wishing you the best in your work, and we hope to have you back again in the not too distant future. I'd like to remind everyone we've posted a link in the description of this talk where you may purchase copies of Beyond the Narrow Life for those interested in responsible community-based therapeutic practice and consciousness exploration. I mean, this book is an invaluable resource. So thank you all for joining us. Please be safe, be well. Hope to see you all soon.